1st of December 2021.
Little is known about it.
Called Omicron.
The Omicron variant.
Omicron COVID strain.
From news.com.au.
I'm Andrew Bucklow, and I've got news for you. Well, bloody Omicron, huh? I mean, just when it seemed like we were finally getting on top of COVID comes along this new strain and it's got people all over the world spooked.
The World Health Organization has labelled it Omicron and says it should be considered a variant of concern.
It may be more transmissible.
Medical experts race to find answers.
We're looking at the cases very carefully and we're getting as much information as we can about the nature of this new variant.
But just how serious is this new variant? I mean, should we all be getting ready for fistfights at Woolies over toilet paper again? Or could this Omicron strain actually be a blessing in disguise for Australia's COVID battle? We'll get one of the country's leading epidemiologists on to answer those questions and to reveal what Omicron means for you. And we'll also meet a Melbourne woman who's suffering from the long-term effects of COVID, including having no sense of taste or smell.
Going out to restaurants I used to love doing, so it's less enjoyable now. And even to the point, having a few drinks with friends, it all just kind of tastes like water to me. So even that's lost its enjoyment too a bit.
Can't even taste booze. I mean, that is not cool. Omicron is a developing story. For the latest updates, go to news.com.au. Now, back to the podcast. Professor Catherine Bennett is the Chair of Epidemiology from Deakin University. Catherine, first up, help me out. Is it Omicron or Omicron?
It's Omicron.
Omicron.
Yep, the short O.
Okay, Omicron. What do we know about this strain so far?
Well, we know that it's carrying lots of mutations. We know that some of those mutations have been associated with a high degree of infectiousness in other variants. So we know it's sort of linked to that risk. And we've also heard out of South Africa, where most of the first early cases have been reported from, that they are seeing a rapid rise in case numbers in the community, something like a tenfold or more rise, over a short 3-week period. But also they're seeing some reinfections, and that was, I think, one of the real stimulants for the WHO calling it early as a variant of concern, rather than waiting till they had all of those things accurately measured, but just the concern based on the profile, both mutation profile, but also how early cases presented. So far, though, importantly, we know that testing works, so rapid antigen testing and PCR, that's important just so we can track the virus. And it's possible that actually you can screen for this particular variant using a certain type of PCR, which is also a real advantage if you can identify cases early, even before you get genomic sequencing. And we expect treatment to still work against this variant. The vaccines, we're not yet sure about. There's nothing yet to indicate that vaccines aren't effective. Of course, the rates are quite low in the Southern African provinces, so it's actually not as clear yet. They're doing a lot of work there to try and understand that in more detail. But so far, there isn't anything to suggest that the vaccines won't be as effective. And hopefully, as we've seen with other variants, the vaccines protect against serious illness. But also, where the early news out of South Africa is those first cases really did present with quite a mild illness. They were in younger people. That's often where you do see a more mild illness anyway, but we're waiting to learn more on that. But the hope is that we're not yet at this early stage seeing any strong indications of more severe illness or a higher hospitalisation rate.
Do we know if anyone has died from this strain yet?
That hasn't been confirmed. We probably are seeing a very small proportion of cases that have been formally identified as this variant. They're up to nearly 3,000 cases a day being reported in South Africa, but we don't have those all confirmed. They're still talking in hundreds in terms of those so far confirmed. So it's too early to tell, and if we are going to see fatalities, often it takes people a week or so with the infection before they develop severe illness, and then there's often a bit of a lag until people do succumb to their infection if they're unwell. It's also hard sometimes to extrapolate from one country to another. And in particular, South Africa has different age profile, but also very high rates of people living with HIV, so who are immunosuppressed, very low vaccination rates compared to countries like Australia. So how we understand the virus in one setting gives us clues to how it works. We can look at rates of infection amongst vaccinated versus unvaccinated, but it's still sometimes quite hard to predict how that particular variant will behave in very different settings. So we learn what we can where we see the virus, and unfortunately overnight we've started to hear of a few more cases, not just in other countries with travellers, but probably now indications of community transmission in Portugal, possibly also in Scotland, for example. So we'll learn from those settings as well what happens when you do have a highly vaccinated community. Does this variant take off, or is it still containable?
This week we've heard from a few public health experts who've said that if Omicron is milder than Delta, we might actually want it to spread within our community and that it could be a good thing. Can you just explain that to me? What do they mean by that?
Yeah, I don't think anyone really wants any virus to spread if we can avoid it. But what we're saying is if this is a bit more infectious than Delta, it will replace Delta, just as Delta replaced Alpha. Alpha was dominant right across the world, and Delta quite quickly, really did, as a fitter virus that one more easily spread between people, take over. And, what you hope in the long term, the big picture, is that progressively, if you have a virus like Delta that can cause severe illness in quite a high percentage of people compared to the very early variants, then, if you can replace that, if it has to be replaced, then you want it to be replaced by a variant that causes less concern, less hospitalisation, less severe illness. So we wouldn't want to deliberately let it run. You still want to contain it because every infection is viral replication. That could be another mutation waiting to happen, a new variant. So you want to still suppress infection, but if it's more infectious, it will still replace, Delta, even if we have suppression on that transmission as well. It would still be a fitter virus that will take advantage of that and outcompete Delta. So we don't want the combination where it's more infectious and causes more severe illness. And the ideal would be if it was actually the reverse. It actually, if it was more infectious, cause less severe illness, and that could replace Delta.
The federal government has already acted on Omicron. They've reintroduced border restrictions on some countries in southern Africa where the variant has already been detected, including South Africa, Malawi and Zimbabwe. Anyone who's been in those countries and isn't an Aussie citizen won't be able to enter Australia. As for those who are Aussie citizens, they're still allowed to arrive from those countries but will need to do 14 days of supervised quarantine. On Tuesday, Federal Health Minister Greg Hunt also announced the government was pushing back the easing of border restrictions.
We will put a pause on the next phase of international arrivals, which would have commenced on the 1st of December. In particular, those arrivals with regards to students and working visas and other related categories, which were going to commence on the 1st of December, will now commence on the 15th of December. We're doing this out of an abundance of caution, but our overwhelming view is that whilst it's an emerging variant, it's a manageable variant.
Catherine, in your opinion, was the government's decision to push back the next stage of the border reopening a good move?
Yeah, we haven't yet sort of moved on our border purpose-built quarantine facilities and so on. I don't think we need to put everybody who arrives into formal supervised quarantine at this stage, but clearly testing at the border, supervised quarantine for those people who are coming in either on a plane with someone else who is positive or from indirectly from any of these areas of concern, then I think, we need to do that. We are allowing citizens and permanent residents to come back. It really is a numbers game. If adding in those people who are coming in on work and student visas pushes the number of people who would need to be managed, who wouldn't have accommodation, a home, already set up to go to where they could safely isolate on their own, then the question is whether we have capacity in hotel quarantine. And if we don't, then unfortunately that means we do have to just hold off until we have the information out of the other parts of the world where the virus is in the community to understand what response we need and whether we do need to step up our border protections again or whether we can step them down and then resume to our current plans.
For those people listening, how worried should us Aussies be about Omicron?
Yeah, I don't think there's any point in worrying until we know more. I think it's easy to say, of course, but at this stage, the WHO has come out overnight really basically saying their concern is for countries around the world with low vaccination rates. because this could lead to even larger waves because of how easily transmissible it appears to be, particularly in unvaccinated communities. And that can be overwhelming to countries where even if it doesn't put more people in hospital, if you have a lot more cases, it will overload systems. So that's their concern. It just reminds us how fortunate we are to have had the rollout get to the point where it has in Australia with high rates. We've still got people waiting on second doses, and we've still got some people yet to have their first dose. They're also looking in Australia at what this might mean for our booster program. Other parts of the world, Scotland now overnight, suggesting they will also speed up their booster rollout given they have this variant in the community. And our government is doing the same. TARG is looking at that very question, just so that when new information comes, they've got all the scenarios covered and they've got decision pathways already mapped out. And that means we can act quickly. And that's the most important thing, that you put things in place to dial up our protections, whether it's at the border, as we've already done, whether it's about the timing of our booster doses, or being asked to wear masks indoors if we worry that we might have started to see some more community transmission. It's all about prevention and keeping it under control, and I think people should feel confident that those things that work, and we still believe vaccines will work anyway, put us in a good position. But ultimately, we've also got good medications now. We're a lot further along in understanding the virus and the disease it causes than we were last year. And there is no reason to think any of these won't work as well. These antivirals have been really reassuring news over these last months as those have come into use and proven to be very effective. So we shouldn't feel scared, but we should actually be watching with interest because it might impact us, hopefully in quite modest ways, which is about, as I said, just dialing up and dialing down our controls in the community so that we do help protect ourselves from having another rise in cases in the near future. This is what living with the virus is. So I do think we just have to, accept that we're going to see these alerts happening, some public health response happening. We need to stay in tune with it, but not lose sleep over it, because at the end of the day, that's what living with the virus is, and staying in control of the virus requires.
Eleanor is a 24-year-old student from Melbourne who's one of the many Aussies dealing with the long-term effects of COVID. Now, Eleanor, when did you first catch the virus?
It was around July last year, so just before the big Melbourne lockdown. I live in Melbourne, and it was kind of when everything was ramping up, restrictions were starting to come into place, and it was kind of that last weekend before it was proper lockdown. So my sister got it. She got it from, I think, a friend or her workplace. I'm not entirely sure still. And she had just moved out, so she was coming home to collect everything that she needed, and I was helping her move out, and I got it then from her.
Spewing. I would be pretty pissed off at my sister.
Yeah.
So what symptoms did you have at the time when you had COVID?
Well, I first noticed I couldn't smell anything or taste anything, so that was the first thing to come about. And then I got a cough as well, which wasn't terrible, but it was annoying, very chesty sort of wet cough. Then the fatigue hit, so I was really tired, sleeping 12 to 14 hours a day. Yeah, it was pretty shocking, but thankfully never had any sort of issues with shortness of breath or anything more severe such as that. But so those symptoms all lasted around 2 to 3 weeks, and then they all went away except the smell and taste. So they're still with me now, unfortunately. But yeah, luckily, no other lasting symptoms.
So that's been more than a year that you haven't had a sense of taste and a sense of smell. What does it feel like when you eat food then? So
when it was July last year, when I was actually still positive, it was shocking. I had no appetite, didn't really feel like eating anything at all. I lost a bit of weight. But now it has changed a little bit. I can, sense when things are savoury or when things are sweet. I can tell if they're spicy or anything like that, but I can't really, it's not very satisfying. It's very difficult to want food, and whenever you do have a craving, it's not really satisfied by actually eating something. So it has taken a lot of the enjoyment out of eating for me.
What sort of effect has that had on your life then? Like, do friends invite you out to dinners now, to expensive restaurants, and you're like, well, what's the point? Why am I paying all this money to eat this food that I can't really taste?
Well, we're all students, so we're all a bit stingy at the moment anyway. But, going out to restaurants, I used to love doing, so it's less enjoyable now. And even to the point, having a few drinks with friends, it all just kind of tastes like water to me. So even that's lost its enjoyment too a bit.
What about the smell then? So there's certain smells that you can smell now, or have you just got kind of nothing?
Similar to taste, I can sense when there are smells in the air. Typically they don't smell like what they used to for me. For example, like I can sometimes sense when there's smoke in the air, but it doesn't smell to me like smoke. It's like nothing that I've ever smelled or could identify beforehand. Occasionally there's just really terrible smells and I'm not sure where they come from or what they are.
If you had to pick which one you wanted back to 100%, would it be smell or taste?
Surprisingly, it would be smell.
Really? How come?
Yeah, I miss the smell of like fresh air, I don't know if you've ever had to isolate or anything, but being stuck inside for 2 weeks isn't great. So that kind of first step out is lovely. But if you couldn't smell any fresh air, it all kind of feels the same as inside. So it's quite damaging on the soul, you could say. But, even the can't smell rain, can't smell all the sort of natural candles that I've got in my room still. I can't tell when I smell, which is also quite annoying. Yeah.
And have doctors said anything about whether or not you'll be able to get these senses back to 100%?
They really have no idea. I've seen a few articles that say, people who have lost senses of smell and taste, some tend to get it back within a few months of being positive. But yeah, they're really not sure. They just say that it's quite an unknown area at the moment. But yeah, here's to hoping though.
We'll keep you up to date on all the latest developments on Omicron at news.com.au. Well, that's all we've got time for today. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll chat to you again tomorrow.